Mr. President, an important consumer right is under attack, under siege today in the United States Senate. It's the right to know what is in your food. A lot of consumers take it for granted that they'll read the ingredients on a package and they'll know what's in their food. The right to know what you're putting in your body is a basic right, and especially what your children are putting in their bodies. I understand that the Agriculture Committee has reported, and the Majority Leader has indicated, that he will bring to the floor a misguided anti-consumer measure that will not only dilute but decimate an essential aspect of that right to know. It's not the name of the bill's proponents that they're using, but I agree with members of the House and this body who have called this bill the Dark Act. Why? Because it denies Americans the right to know. Unfortunately, that's essentially what the bill does. It denies Americans the right to know. I hold a pretty simple belief that labels on the food we buy should accurately reflect what's in the food. Whether it's the nutrition content, the ingredients, whether something is organic or not, consumers should know what they are paying for and what they are putting in their bodies. That's how we keep the large corporations that make most of our food from using ingredients that are unhealthful, and essentially potentially deceptive. Like the overwhelming majority of people in this country, and by the way, a poll released in December said it was about 90%, I support mandatory on-package labeling of food containing genetically modified organisms, GMOs. This support cuts across geographic lines, party lines, because it's such a common sense position. Leave it up to consumers to decide. You and I, when we buy food products and when we consume them, if they want to buy a particular product, let them do so, but make sure they know what they are getting. This issue is of particular importance to my constituents. I'm proud that Connecticut was the first state to enact legislation that would require mandatory labeling of genetically engineered foods. And as Attorney General of Connecticut, I championed this measure. And it is a consummate example of consumer protection and consumer education. The Dark Act, by contrast, would strip my state of its ability to protect our own people. It would prevent states, including Connecticut, Maine, Vermont, which have already done so, from enacting laws requiring the labeling of GMO foods. It would take away from states their right to pass laws to ensure their citizens have access to basic information about their food, and it would preempt long-standing state consumer protection laws in all 50 states. These laws pertain to false advertising, consumer protection, fraud, breach of warranty, or unfair trade practices. This measure is a sweeping and draconian proposal. And that would be bad enough. But the Dark Act actually goes further. It would also bar states and local communities from enacting any kind of law overseeing genetically modified crops. Several counties in California and Oregon, as well as the states of Washington and Hawaii, have restricted planting of GMO crops, citing the untested health effects of GMO seeds, the economic effects of the mega companies that produce these seeds on local farmers, and the unknown long-term environmental consequences. But this bill would stop all of those efforts, state and local efforts, stop them in their tracks, dead. In addition to keeping information from consumers, the Dark Act would affect hardworking farmers who will have no way of knowing whether the seed they purchase is genetically engineered. And that's true even if the seeds are altered in a way that prevents crops from reproducing, forcing farmers to buy new seeds every season from the GMO company. Now, I don't mean to cast aspersions on the biotechnology industry. There is enormous potential in research on this front, and scientists have made many, many contributions to our food supply, and there may be scientific efforts underway in this area that have healthful and economically beneficial results. But keeping consumers in the dark is harmful. And the rule ought to be first, do no harm. If there is scientific support for the health or environmental benefits, why not let consumers know? Let consumers make knowledgeable and informed choices. Consumers are capable of those kinds of choices, and I'm shocked that this deliberative body is considering a measure that is crafted so purposefully and intentionally to, in effect, deceive the American public and actively deny them the accurate information they deserve. There's no question that this bill is nothing more than a carve-out for big businesses and mega GMO seed corporations. My view is that this body ought to facilitate transparency, that federal legislation should promote information and education, not inhibit or prevent it. That's why I've endorsed a bill that Senator Merkley and others of us are proposing and advocating that, in a very common sense way, allows manufacturers to choose from a menu of options to indicate to consumers whether a product includes genetically engineered ingredients. I want to make clear and emphasize, we are not calling for some kind of skull and crossbones logo or black box warning label. In fact, we're not talking about a warning, we're talking about information, and the options on the menu that would be offered to food producers are non-judgmental, clear, concise, and accurate. This information is impartial and objective, allowing consumers to make informed decisions. Last month, the Secretary of Agriculture convened a series of meetings in an attempt to broker a compromise between industry and labeling advocates. And I want to take a moment to commend the unflagging leadership of a number of groups in my state and one of my constituents, Tara Cook Littman, who by coincidence was the only woman at these meetings. She is the co-founder of Citizens for GMO Labeling. She led the grassroots effort in Connecticut to pass the first in the nation GMO labeling law. She's also the mother of 3 children whom I have met. Like most Americans, she cares deeply about what they and her family are eating. As part of their innovation cycle, food companies often redesign and relaunch products, adding new attributes to existing products, such as flavors and new ingredients. So they can handle the normal course of relabeling and repackaging. And one of the most important points that Tara has raised is that the industry's proposed solution to include QR codes on GMO products is really no solution at all. QR codes, which let you use a smartphone to scan a product to be linked to a web page with information, are no substitute for clear, explicit labels that all consumers can see with the transparency and objectivity they deserve and need, and relying on QR codes discriminates against people who are unable to afford a smartphone or a data plan. It threatens privacy by allowing industry to keep track of who is scanning what product, information that many of us might not want to be in the hands of companies and used to market to us, and from a very practical standpoint, may not be usable where reception is weak or non-existent. Everyone who has shopped with a baby or a child knows shopping is hard enough under some circumstances, and forcing companies to try to get the right scan of a product when the information could simply appear on the label is absurd. And what is the reason for the QR code other than to make it more difficult for a consumer to know? What rationale could there be other than creating a hurdle for that consumer to learn that information? So I urge my colleagues, do not be fooled or tricked by the Dark Act claims that food prices will rise with GMO labeling. Not so. Food processors regularly make changes to these labels to meet changing consumer demand or for other marketing or regulatory reasons. In fact, Ben & Jerry's co-founder, Jerry Greenfield, confirmed it's a normal course of business to be going through changes on your labels. And other responsible food companies have joined Ben & Jerry's, most prominently Campbell's Soup. I commend their leadership. My constituents and all consumers should be aware that there are companies like Campbell's who have stepped forward and want consumers to be more informed, not less. We are on the brink of potentially passing legislation as early as tomorrow morning that would ban states like Connecticut from requiring GMO labeling. That is a violation of the very essence of states' rights to protect their citizens. It may well be that some states want to be stronger in protecting their citizens than others. They should have the right to do so. Preempting all state legislation in this area infringes on that fundamental sovereignty and right of states to protect their citizens. As the American Association of Justice has stated, this legislation will unjustly preempt state consumer protection laws, and I know the importance of that preemption doctrine as a former Attorney General who has fought consistently to allow states to set standards for consumer protection and enforce those standards, both federal and state. I commend those manufacturers that have realized that now is the time to embrace GMO labeling, including Campbell's, Ben & Jerry's, Amy's Kitchen, and Nature's Path. I hope that we can work together with food manufacturers to give American consumers, like consumers in 63 countries around the world, 63 countries around the world, a more transparent food system by approving a mandatory on-packaging GMO labeling system and rejecting this anti-consumer effort.